Hello, and welcome to the Unworthy Leader Podcast. I'm Kendra Dahlstrom, an executive coach to Fortune 500 leaders, and this show is about flipping the script on leadership. Here we talk openly about the parts most people want to hide, like self-doubt, imposter syndrome, fear, and what I like to call the messy middle. We all experience this, and I believe true leadership isn't about perfection. It's about honesty, wholeness, and showing up. You'll hear real stories, researched, backed insights, and conversations about leading authentically, even when you may feel unworthy. Let's dive in. Hey, just jumping in here real quick because I recently learned that only 2% of our listeners actually subscribe to our show. Please be sure to hit follow and subscribe so you never miss an episode. And if you've got a second, leaving a quick review helps more imperfect leaders like and find us. Thanks for being part of our journey. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Unworthy Leader Podcast, where high-achieving leaders finally get to tell the truth about their imposter thoughts and self-doubt and the pressure to perform. I'm your host, Kendra Dahlstrom, and today I am so excited to have a former mentor and a friend, Grant Baldwin, the founder of the Speaker Lab. Grant, it's really great to have you here and to reconnect with you after quite some time. Welcome to the show.
It is an honor, delight to be here. Whenever you reached out, I was like, oh yeah, I can't wait for this one. This is going to be fun. Whatever we're going to talk about, I'm in for.
It's so awesome. And I have to honestly say that when I launched this podcast, you were one of the first people that came to mind that I said, I have to have him on because I think it's highly, highly probable. I'd probably give it like a 98% chance that I would not have even been doing this show right now if it wasn't for you and your support back in 2017 when I joined the Speaker Lab.
That's cool. That's so cool. Well, I tell people all the time, like, we can tell you exactly, here's what you need to do and the steps you need to take, but ultimately it's up to you. You got to actually do the work. And so I have contributed nothing to you doing a podcast. It's you doing the work. So I appreciate the kind words, but kudos to you for taking action on this.
Thank you. And I appreciate that. But I would challenge that a bit because I think what I really love about the Speaker Lab, and I want to have you share with the audience a little bit more about your backstory and what it is that you provide for people today, is it really provided this idea in my own mind, like, oh, I can do that. Because I've always only seen people out there doing keynotes and speaking that have big names.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
They've written books and they're celebrities. And so you really sort of opened my mind for the first time to that possibility that, oh, there's money in this and you can do it and you can make a good career at it, even if you're not quote unquote famous. So Thank you.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. And yeah, I totally resonate with that. I felt like that when I got started as a speaker. I remember, I've shared this before, but there's a friend of mine who's a speaker, and he had cancer as a child, had one of his legs amputated, and ended up being a one-legged downhill skier in the Paralympics. And I just remember hearing the story, and I was just like, I'm like a white male from the Midwest who grew up in a middle-class family. I've never broken a bone. Like, there's nothing on paper where you'd be like, oh, well, of course that guy's a speaker, and exactly what you're describing of someone who, they were an Olympic medalist, or they are some famous author, or they climbed Mount Everest in their shorts blindfolded, and something where people are like, oh, well, of course that person should be a speaker, and I felt like you had to have that, and I quickly realized that ultimately you don't. Like, part of being a speaker and part of being an entrepreneur is your job is to solve problems, and solving one specific problem for one specific audience. And if you can do that well, having some type of like crazy background or story is nice, but it's not necessarily like a must-have by any means. There's plenty of people out there that are just normal, everyday people like you or I, and plenty of people that who will never be some big name, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever.
Yeah, I love that so much. Why don't you share a little bit of your backstory? I know it personally, but I'd love for the audience to hear a little bit about your backstory and how it really led you to this ideation of the Speaker Lab and its success today?
Yeah. So if we go way back in high school, I was really involved in my local church, and my youth pastor had a big impact on my life. And I was like, I want to do that. Like, that seems really cool. That seemed fulfilling and rewarding. And I kind of felt like if I could make the kind of impact and difference in others' lives that he made in mine, that just seemed rewarding. And so that was kind of the track I was on. I went to Bible college and then started working as a youth pastor at a local church. And in that role, it gave me a lot of opportunities to speak. And so I was speaking on a weekly basis to students. And then every so often I would speak on the weekend in big church. And I just really enjoyed it. I felt like I was decent at it. I got good feedback. And I was like, hey, maybe there's something here. And so at the time, my wife was pregnant with our first child. And there's just nothing like bringing a kid in the world that just causes you to question everything about life. And so there were parts of being a youth pastor I liked, parts that I didn't like. But one thing I really enjoyed was speaking. And so when she was pregnant with our oldest child, I was just like, I think I want to give this speaking thing a shot. And so I left the youth pastor gig and started trying to book gigs. And at the time, this was 19, 20 years ago or so, there were no books on speaking or podcasts on speaking or courses or resources, so I found myself like emailing other speakers, stalking other speakers, harassing other speakers, kind of pick your brain sort of stuff, and just trying to learn something, anything I possibly could. And just a lot of the questions I had were things like, how do I find gigs? And what do I speak about? And who hires speakers? And how much do you charge? And like, for many people, speaking is this like mysterious black box. And it just feels like you said, you got to be an insider. You got to know someone who can get you on the circuit, whatever that means, And it just felt like this huge obstacle. Quickly, I started booking some gigs and figuring out what to do, and got to a point where I eventually was doing about 60, 70 gigs a year, and it was awesome. I loved it. I was traveling all over, and I really, really liked it. One of the downsides of it is the nature of speaking is it's a high-paying manual labor job. In that you get paid really well to stand on stage and run your mouth, but the nature of it is you got to get on a plane, you got to leave your family, you got to go somewhere. And eventually you just kind of, like the 1 hour you're on stage is amazing, and everything else, the travel, waking up in a different state, you're just like, I just want to be home. I just want to go to my family. I want to sleep in my own bed. I'm married to my high school sweetheart. We've been together 28 years. We got 3 daughters. And as much as like speaking is cool and fun and fulfilling, it's like, I want to be home. And so I started having more and more people who'd reach out and say, hey, I see that you've had some kind of success as a speaker. I want to do that. How do I do that? And so we started doing some teaching and coaching and training around that. And that started going well, and we continued to kind of double down on that. That really evolved into the Speaker Lab. And so at the Speaker Lab, we teach primarily the business of speaking. How do you get booked and paid to speak? How do you take a message and make an impact, make an income with that? One of the cool things is, like, as you well know, Kendra, there's a lot of people who are interested in speaking, and speaking can look a lot of different ways. There are people that we both know that speak 100 times a year, and it's awesome. And people that were like, that sounds awful. And I would love to do 5 times a year, but I just don't know, how do I do that? And again, the same questions I was asking. How do I find gigs? What do I speak about? Who hires speakers? How does this work? And so, we started doing some training around that. And so that's the core of where I spend my energy and effort today.
That's amazing. Tell me where you're at now, because I know you had personal goals with numbers on how many people you wanted to help through the Speaker Lab.
We've helped thousands of speakers, and it's hard to, I don't know, sometimes it feels hard to quantify because there's a lot of different ways to measure it, So we have a podcast where we've been doing a weekly episode for almost 10 years at this point. We have I think it's 550 episodes, something like that. We had a book that sold tens of thousands of copies. And we have some of our paid programs, a lot of free content as well. And so it's kind of like, how do you measure that ripple impact and ripple effect? I don't know. But I do know, and I'm very confident, that we've helped tens of thousands of speakers at various stages and parts of their career and their journey. And, speaking is no different than any other business out there, where there's steps to follow and things that you can do, but ultimately, like, it's a lot of work. It's a lot of effort. It doesn't mean it's not worth it, but I think there are certainly, because speaking is like this very aspirational, somewhat glamorous type thing. It's like, I want to be on stage and people laugh at my jokes and stand and applaud for me and give me money. That sounds awesome, right? It's like, yeah, but like, it's just a lot of work to do that. You can do it, but it's a lot of work. And so, there's a lot of people who come across our ecosystem and our radar who are like, speaking sounds cool, I want to do that. And then again, like anything, realize like, oh wait, this is hard. It's like,
It is hard.
it is. It requires working out. It's kind of like I equate it oftentimes to like health and fitness. If you wanted to be in shape, whatever that means, then like ultimately there's two things you need to do. You need to pay attention to what you eat, and you need to exercise. And it's simple, but it's not easy. Like, it still requires work, still requires effort. Just going like, yeah, that's right. I should pay attention to what I eat, and I should exercise. That sounds good, but like, then you have a choice between Oreos and kale, and Oreos are just good. And so it's hard. And the same thing is true with speaking. You can absolutely do this. You can be successful, but it requires work and effort like anything in life.
Absolutely. And I love that you were so honest about that. When I think back to when I was in your training course,
Yeah.
and I think it was even part of that first beta elite group that I was
Oh yeah, way back when.
blessed to be part of, with some really cool people that I keep in touch with today still. And one of the things you're really honest about was that you need to have discipline to do this, or it's not going to work. And it reminds me of the old adage that I use a lot in coaching. It's knowing versus practicing.
Yeah.
Like, to your point about eating and working out, it's the one thing to know it, but like, are you actively practicing? And if you're not willing to get in there and do the war of art and actively practice and be in it every day, then it's probably not going to work out. And I remember being at the computer for hours and hours one day and Googling for call for speakers.
Sure. Yeah.
And I was shocked at how many things come up. Like, I didn't know that it was going to be that easy, but to find them. But then it's about applying. And I remember the one that I got that I was so excited about. I think I got it within 3 months of taking your program. It paid for the cost of the class and more. I think they paid me $5,000 plus T&E, which was pretty good for my first ever,
totally,
keynote.
Absolutely.
And it was with the National Association of Realtors. And the funny thing about it is, and the reason I want to mention it is just shout out to Grant and his program, is one thing he taught us was that you can speak to anybody. You don't have to be an expert in bowling to speak to the Bowling League of America. And so I thought, I'm not a realtor. I know nothing about it. So it's asking me all these questions like, are you a realtor? How long you been in the industry? I'm like, no.
Yeah.
And then in the thing, it said, what are open comments? I said, I'm not a realtor, but here's how I can help you. And I wrote it out, and it was between me. I think they said they got like 1,300 applications.
Wow.
And they picked 2 of us.
That's cool.
So message to all of you, like, you don't have to necessarily be an expert, right, in the speaking genre or whatever it is you're looking to go speak at in a conference. It's about how can you help them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, the core of being a speaker and being an entrepreneur in general, like we said, was just that your job is to solve a problem and solve one specific problem for one specific audience. And even kind of going back to one of the things that you mentioned before is we talk a lot about the difference between professionals and amateurs. You cannot put in amateur effort and expect professional results. Like, it just doesn't work like that. And again, we see this in any other element of life, but the same thing is true with speaking. So, for example, I used this example the other day of I haven't told many people this, but I am intrigued to learn to play drums. I have no reason to do this. I'm not going to be in a band and don't want to ever do this like professionally or publicly or anything. I just think it'd be cool. Sit down, take a pair of sticks, and have some idea what you're doing, right? So I started taking drum lessons a couple of months ago, and it's going fine. But also I recognize like with a lot of things, like when you're learning a new skill, you make a lot of progress quickly, and then you reach the point where like, wait, this is hard now, right? And it's easy to get discouraged and be like, I don't want to do this anymore. Let's go back to when it was fun. And so there are times where we'll be at church or something. I'll see someone who's like a good drummer and they know what they're doing. And I was like, oh man, I wish I was that good. And I'm just like, listen, you can't like practice once a week or twice a week and think that like you're going to magically click your heels together and be as good as someone who's put in the effort. They've put in the reps. It's the same thing. Like, I play a lot of pickleball, and I play a couple times a week with some buddies, and there are plenty of people I play with who take it way more seriously than I do. And for me, I'm kind of like, if I get to hang out with some buddies and I get a good workout and we get a good sweat, that's fine for me. But there are people who they play tournaments, they analyze all the new paddles, they travel around, they just take it really, really seriously, right? And as a result of that, several of them are just better than me. They're just objectively better. And so there are times where I get discouraged or frustrated, like, oh man, they're better than me, or I'm the weak link or whatever. And it's like, yeah, because they're just spending more energy and effort on that. So I can't be frustrated about the results that they have when they're just putting more into it, right? And the same thing is true with speaking. You can't just be like, I was successful in my career over here and I climbed this many rungs of the ladder, therefore it just automatically translates to now a speaking career. It just doesn't work like that, right? And so your results are directly attributable to the work and the effort that you put into it. And so I think it's just so important for people to realize that if you want professional results, then you got to put in professional efforts.
Yeah, I love that you said that, because in my current role working with C-suite executives and VPs at a very, very large company, I find that they're sometimes surprised when the expertise they have in their domain, and a lot of these people are engineers and, they've got PhDs, doesn't always translate to presence on stage. And they're kind of shocked by it. And I'm like, no, it's like a completely different, it's like learning to ride a bike for the first time. It's totally different. And I love that you said that, because I think that's a false expectation that we hold ourselves to that is actually not serving us, is that it's just going to translate and it should be quote unquote easy.
Totally.
And it's often not. And then what I find is then they start to kind of get doubtful, and so I want to transition into that. And given the theme of this podcast is, let's start with you and then we'll talk to the clients you serve. How did any sort of imposter thoughts, why me, am I in the right place, or even self-doubt show up as you were transitioning from pastor into full-time speaking and or building this entrepreneurship?
Yeah, I don't think those things ever go away. I still feel those. An example would be, so I went from youth pastor at a church of where there's probably, 12 people or so on staff. And then I became a speaker. There's just kind of a solopreneur type thing, and then started the Speaker Lab. And so the Speaker Lab today, we have about 35, 40 team members and employees. And so I've told the team regularly, I know people are looking to me, and I was like, listen, I'm in my early 40s. This is the biggest company I've ever worked at. So it's not like I'm coming from some Fortune 100 company. I was like, I have all this corporate experience and I know exactly how this is supposed to work. And I've said in these board meetings that I don't, right? And so there's plenty of days where I have that imposter syndrome and those doubts and insecurities, and people are looking to you for answers, and you're trying to be confident. And at the same time, you're going like, I don't know what the heck I'm talking about, And one of the things that I enjoy talking about this, and I like this topic so much, is I tell entrepreneurs all the time, speakers all the time, listen, anyone you look up to, you admire, you respect, anyone who is a step or two ahead of you or light years ahead of you, I promise you, they are doing their best and they're just making it up as they go. And there's days where you're just like, yeah, I feel like, okay, we've made a couple good decisions and things are clicking well. And other days you're like, well, we had a good run, and I guess I'll go try to be a greeter at Walmart or something. I don't know where to go from here, right? And that's just the reality of it. And I think the more I've seen that in so many different phases of my career that someone I'll look up to in my respect. I'll give you an example. I won't name a name, but there's a guy that probably 20 years older than me that I looked up to for years and years, and just had this guy on such a pedestal. And he's still a guy I highly respect. I remember I really got connected with him maybe a year ago or so. We did lunch and hung out a couple times. And just the more I talked to him, the more I was just like, oh, you don't know what you're doing either. Not in a mean way or a negative way whatsoever, right? And we were talking entrepreneurship, we're talking marriage, we're talking parenting, and he has daughters as well. I have daughters. And I was like, hey, what do I do in this? I just thought in my mind your daughters are perfect because yours seem like this perfect. Oh, it turns out they're not. Okay, good. That just sets me at ease,
Oh.
And it just humanizes him. And again, not to knock him down. And anyway, still massive respect and confidence in this guy. But it's just oh, you're just a dude like me. You're just doing your best. You're just trying. And some days you get it right, and then a lot of days you don't, and that's okay, because that's the reality with all of us. And so, yeah, I definitely feel a lot of imposter syndrome 20 years ago, and I certainly still feel some today.
Yeah. Well, thank you for being so vulnerable. I think it's such an important thing that we all start to normalize this conversation and destigmatize it as meaning something bad about us personally,
Totally.
or however we interpret it. Because my experience has been that whenever you're growing, you're going to have self-doubt. You're going to have imposter thoughts. And to think you're not, that's silly, because you're going to have them no matter what. Otherwise, you're not growing, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I've been self-employed for almost 20 years now, and I think that you still have those doubts and insecurities and fears. I think you just learn to manage them more over time. I don't know that they ever fully go away. And my assumption is, again, that's the case with anybody at any stage and age of their career. People that are way ahead of you or people that are way behind you, whatever that may mean, is that we're, again, like I say, we're all doing our best. We're all making it up as we go, and we're all just struggling along and trying to put our smiley face on and pretend like we know what we're doing.
Yeah, that's so liberating. And
It
I
is.
bet it felt so good for you to hear that from the gentleman that you were speaking of, that you have so
Totally.
much.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just, I think it, like, I think about like the team that I work with at the Speaker Lab, and I think it's helpful for them to realize like, hey, I may be leading this company, but it doesn't mean that I have all the answers, and it doesn't mean that I'm perfect, and it doesn't mean that I won't make mistakes, or that I will have, I don't have doubts or fears or insecurities or any of those things. Like, I think it just shows like, oh, he's human like the rest of us, And the same thing like with my daughters or with my wife, like they already know I'm not perfect. So if I can express that, they're like, okay, so he at least has some self-awareness about himself. And so, yeah, I think we're all just doing our best.
Yeah. And so how do you message that to your team? Like, for instance, if you're in a meeting and you're talking and you're feeling confident, and then you sort of have that, well, shoot, maybe I'm making this up. Do you just say that, or
Yeah, I
how
mean,
do
there's
you?
times, yeah, there's certainly
Yeah.
times where I've expressed that, or I mean, a lot of times I think that um, I think there's a version of leadership where people just assume like you're a leader, therefore you have the answers, or you're the owner or the CEO or whatever, therefore you have the answers, and so I should come to you, and you're up on the mountaintop. And so often, one of our core values, we have three core values at the company, and one of those is ownership. And so I say all the time, like, this is not the Grant show. And so if this whole thing is contingent on me, then like we're screwed. Like, I don't want to be the bottleneck for this, And so I tell people, like, I do an orientation with all new team members, and I say, I know you just walked in the door, but you're just as important and valuable as anybody else here. And so we value you. We want your input, And so, I may be someone that does, podcasts like this or host our podcast, or, my name may be on the cover of a book or something, but like, that doesn't mean that like this whole thing is about me. So even whenever I talk about the Speaker Lab, like I talk about it in terms of we, us, our, like I don't talk about it as mine, my, I, it's only about Grant, and you're all here to serve and support Grant. Like, I don't think that at all whatsoever. And so some of it is just reminding them of that, like, hey, you're just as much a part of this. This isn't just about me. So there's part of it that, and part of it also just getting their feedback of, Grant, what do you think we should do? I don't know. What do you think we should do? Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's do that, And I've heard from multiple team members who have said, at one point, Grant, you asked me my opinion, and then you said, yeah, that sounds good. Let's do that. And it's like, oh, maybe he does believe in me and my ideas and my ability to contribute to something, and he doesn't have to have all the answers, and he doesn't have to have all the ideas. And so I think those are a few ways I try to approach it with the team, to let them know, like, I don't feel any obligation that I have to have all the answers. And if I don't know something, or if I don't have an opinion on something, I'm very comfortable saying that, and very secure saying like, yeah, I don't know, or I don't really have a strong feeling either. What do you, yeah, that sounds okay. That's good. Let's do that. And I'm totally good with that.
It's so admirable, because a lot of leaders struggle with that. I think it's pressure they put on themselves. I think it's also my experiences in a little bit of a different world, but I think there's so many red threads that we could pull through. But when you're looking at big corporations, a lot of those people, unfortunately, I believe, have been rewarded, given incentives, and acknowledged for always being the smartest person in the room or having the best ideas. And so that becomes their strategy. And suddenly they don't know how to be vulnerable or authentic and say, hey, what do you think? Or I'm not sure about this, without looking at it as a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
And then what that does in the work I do is, and what I try to help do, is help them realize how that completely separates the team, and you lose connectedness, you lose authenticity, you lose relatability, and no team can function and thrive. And you lose innovation and good ideas. Like, to your point, like, team members may have great ideas, and you're shutting all that off when you think you're the only one that has to have all the answers.
Yeah, I mean, there's the expression, if you're the smartest one in the room, you're in the wrong room. And so
That's right.
there have certainly been times where I have been in a meeting or something and feel like I am not the smartest person here. And I think there's certainly times where you feel some like insecurity or doubt of like, do I need to be smarter on this, or what am I doing? And then there's times like, no, this is good. Something's working, right? If you were doing that. And so you have to have some level of like self-confidence and awareness in yourself in that. And like you said, like you come from a like major corporate backgrounds where there is a lot of positioning and there is a lot of jockeying and there is a lot of politics and there is a lot of like, I've got to, show off or show up in order to, I need you to lose so that I can win. And
Right.
I think we try to internally just create a culture of, I've told our sales team this before, is like, have the type of mentality of, I don't need you to lose so I can win. Like, it's okay to be competitive. I want to beat you, but I want you to win too. I want you to do well. I just want to do slightly better because we're all competitive here, right? And so there's nothing wrong with that. But this idea of like, I got to stab you in the back, or I got to slit your throat, or I got to undercut you, or I got to talk trash about you, whatever, anything along those lines, like that's just toxic, unhealthy behavior. And if anything, like I think it's a sign of weakness, and it's a sign of immaturity. And like, I don't want to operate like that personally. And I don't want to be a part or lead an organization that thinks or operates like that.
Yeah. And that's why I love you so much. I just love your management style and how you've shown up to build this company and with that integrity as well. What advice would you have for people who are listening who go on stages, but they still find themselves getting a lot of what I would call preparatory or anticipatory anxiety? And sometimes it's even performative. And then we have a group of people, including myself, that I get I'll do a lot of the hangover. I'll do a lot of like the vulnerability hangover. Like I get it more at the end after I'm like, oh, what did I say? And I should have done that different. So to people who have anxiety during any of those phases, what would be your advice to them to navigate those doubts and judgments?
Yeah, I think sometimes the nerves, the anxiety that you feel before you're speaking, I think sometimes we can confuse that just with like energy and excitement. And so I like to always think back to like some of your like big moments in life. Like, so for me, I think about like whenever I proposed to my wife, or whenever my kids were born, or if you I don't know, some major moment, and you feel those butterflies, you feel that, and sometimes we think like, oh my gosh, this means like I'm nervous this is gonna fail or something, or it's not gonna work. It's like, no, oftentimes it's just like your body's way of saying like, hey, heads up, like this is a big deal, pay attention, lock in. It's kind of like if you're a professional athlete and you're playing in the Super Bowl or something, like those are professional athletes who've been doing this their entire careers. They are world class at what it is that they do, but I guarantee they still feel those butterflies. It doesn't mean that they're going, oh no, I'm not ready, I'm not prepared. No, like they've spent their lives getting ready for this moment, but they still feel that. And again, it's just the body's way of saying like, hey, this is important, like pay attention, lock in right now, right? And so the question is ultimately like, okay, if I feel those things, how do I just make sure that they don't become debilitating and they don't become just completely overwhelming? And I think one of the best things that you can do is really spend a significant amount of time behind the scenes practicing, preparing for that moment. And so sometimes we look at the best speakers on the planet and we think, oh, wow, well, they're just naturally charismatic, or they're naturally engaging, or they're naturally funny, and they just hop up on stage and they riff on some thoughts and it all just works out. We think sometimes it's similar with like a comedian, which is like, oh, they're just funny and they just tell some jokes and it all just comes together and to this hour-long Netflix special. And it just doesn't work like that. Like they spend so much time behind the scenes practicing, preparing, rehearsing, going over it time and time and time again, so that by the time they get up on stage, it looks like, oh wow, they're just naturally funny, or they're just winging this. When in reality, like it's very choreographed and it's very thought through. The same thing, and this is true again with anybody you see that's world-class at what it is that they do. If you watch a professional athlete, like, oh, they're good at basketball. Like, yeah, they're good at basketball, but also like there's like this whole game of chess going on during the game, like that we don't see, that we don't understand because of how much work they're doing, behind the scenes. Or, a musician. Like I remember we went to, as a dad with 3 daughters and a wife, like we have a lot of Taylor Swift fans in our house.
I was going to say, are you Swifties?
We went to the Eras tour, 2 years ago or whatever it was. I tell you what, that was an amazing concert. I had so much fun, and it was 3.5 hours of just nonstop energy, and everything was choreographed. And it wasn't like, oh, she's just going to sing some songs and dance. It was just like everything was choreographed. But it's just like, you're just watching a professional do what they do, and you're like, wow, it's really impressive. Now, is she nervous? Probably a little bit, when she gets started, but then it kind of like kicks in of just confidence of like, no, like I've prepared for this. I've studied for this. I've trained for this. I'm ready for this. And so whenever I get ready to speak, I feel those same feelings, backstage or they're reading through your introduction and you're like, oh my gosh, I hope this works. How am I starting? What's my opening story? And you still run through some of those things. Then what normally happens is you hop up, you get started, and you feel those butterflies the first 15, 30 seconds, and you kind of settle in and you're like, okay, let's go, And so again, the key here is to really spend the time practicing, preparing. And so it gives you a lot more confidence. Like I always like to think about, if you think back to high school or college or university and you're taking an exam or taking a quiz of some kind, like you can just show up and wing it. Just kind of like phone it in, we'll see. And like the results are probably going to speak for themselves. But also you could say, okay, I'm really going to spend the time of practicing, preparing, reviewing study questions, reviewing my notes, taking practice exams or quizzes, whatever it may be. So by the time you show up, you're like, I'm probably still a little bit nervous, but also there's a level of confidence like, no, I'm ready for this. I can do this. I'm ready for this moment. And so the same thing is true with speaking. You've got to spend the time practicing and preparing so it gives you a level of confidence going into it.
Yeah. That's so well said. And I actually have had a few professional athletes on, and they've said the exact same thing you said. They said it's just the nerves are just your body's way of gearing up for your highest level of performance. Mm-hmm. And it's all about how you interpret them and what you do with them. So you just confirmed everything that they've said.
And if anything, like the opposite is true, meaning like if you're getting ready to speak and you're like, I don't feel anything, like that's probably a bad thing. That's probably something where it's like, do you really want to be doing this? Or is this really that important to you? Or are you just going through the motions or phoning it in? And so that's also something to be paying attention to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then just to hit on your topic of how this is related to professionalism, one thing that I've often found, because many times in my work, I would deal with speakers who are already in a corporate environment. So it's not something they're technically getting paid to do, or it's in addition to their job. But one thing that I found really interesting for them that I'd love your thoughts on, and for the audience here, is that when I told them, I said, how would you prepare for this differently and or treat the entire process differently if you were getting paid $50,000 to talk? And suddenly they're like, oh, I'd rehearse a lot more. I'd create more space in my schedule so I have more time for me and I'm not so stressed out. And suddenly the whole door blows open and they're like, oh, I do things a lot different. I said, well, then why aren't you taking it as seriously? You are a professional.
Yeah. Well, and it's just kind of like the stakes are higher, So again, let's just take like a professional athlete. Let's take a professional NFL player, and the way that they are thinking about playing in an NFL game, or rather playing in a Super Bowl, versus the way they're feeling about playing in a preseason meaningless game. They're playing the exact same game in front of a crowd with their teammates, but like the stakes are just dramatically different. And so they're going to think about it. They're going to approach one of those vastly different than the other. And so I like that, the way you're kind of describing it, of going like, kind of raise the stakes in your own mind of what it means and the importance of it, and see how you respond or react accordingly.
Yeah, because to your point, what you get out of it is what you put into it, right?
Totally. Yeah.
So you can probably go further faster if you continue to treat it as you're a professional versus just like, oh, this is just a $2,000 gig, no big deal, right?
Yep.
Right. So when we think about the speaking industry, one thing that I've often found, and it's been this interesting paradox, I call it the performance trap, because they feel so much pressure. And my experience personally and working with others has been that they tend to over rotate to being impressive versus being authentic. And so I'd love for you to talk about that.
Yeah. One of the dangerous things whenever it comes to practice and preparation is, like you said, it's easy to become over prepared and over practice. And as a speaker, one of the things that you have to remember is that you are a human talking to a collection of other humans. And so act like a human. And so we've all seen speakers before where it feels very robotic and formulaic, and it just feels like they're so deep in their own head and they are just regurgitating this script, and I have to exactly remember my line, and then I walk over here and I do this with and it's just like, it just feels stale. It feels rehearsed, and the audience, you start to kind of disengage, from it, because it just doesn't feel authentic. It doesn't feel genuine. And so again, I think that's one of the things that makes amazing speakers, amazing performers great at what they do, is they're so well rehearsed and so well practiced that it looks like it's just off the cuff. It looks like it's just on the fly, but it's because they're so comfortable in doing it. And so I always think about, like, I'm not a musician whatsoever, despite my interest in learning to play drums. And I always think about, like, speaking as a blend between like sheet music and jazz. And so sheet music is, you play it exactly like it's written, right? There's no improv, there's no throw your own spin on it. You play it like this. And so you want to have elements of this. I want to say this line exactly like this, and I want to deliver this punchline just like this with this timing, right? And so there's parts of that is very much sheet music that you figured out what works and you want to do it that way. And other parts of being present in the room and being aware and kind of reading the audience. And, it's kind of interesting, as you well know, Kendra, like, as a speaker, you have you're giving a speech, you're giving a presentation, there may be 50 people or 5,000 people in the room, and you're having all these internal dialogues as this talk is happening. You're having this out of body moment of going, I'm giving my talk, I'm giving my presentation, but I'm also reading the room and I'm thinking about, okay, I just delivered this line and here's how they reacted. Okay, how does that mean that they're going to react in 12 minutes when I give this other story? Oh, if they like that, they're going to love, I can't wait till I get to this part, or this thing just bombed. Shoot, I got to start okay, let's cut this thing and let's move this thing around. And you're doing all of this, these math algorithms in your head about the speech yet to come, right? And so part of that is again, you're doing some jazz, you're doing some improv there. If something, part of being a speaker, as you know, is random things happen in a room. A cell phone goes off, someone sneezes really loud, something crazy happens, those things happen, and so being willing to, all right, for a second here, I got to play some jazz, we got to just kind of roll with this. Or something happened in the room, prior to you speaking. I remember years ago, I was speaking at an event, and there was Secret Service. It was in Washington, D.C. There's Secret Service everywhere in this hotel. I mean, it was overwhelming. You're what is happening here? Well, I learned that the G8 summit of all these world leaders was happening at the time, and the president of China was staying at this hotel. I made a couple of references to hey, here's what not to do when sharing a hotel with the president of China, right? Well, it only works in that setting. You can't go to a different hotel later, a month later and be okay, hear me out, let me explain the situation. And that doesn't work, So there's these punchlines or jokes about that only works in that setting. You're just going to play some jazz to that moment that only works in that type of setting. But it also creates one of those moments where I think one of the most powerful moments as a speaker is one of those that it works so well in that moment and it doesn't work anywhere else. It's one of those you had to be there type deal, and it makes it we all have this shared experience that we were here together when this thing happened. And it makes it feel so much more genuine and authentic versus that kind of feels like he just gave or she just gave the same canned speech they've given 1,000 times, And so having that blend of sheet music and jazz is, I think, a good way to approach it.
I love that metaphor, and I can see how that would be so valuable really in any type of speaking. So leading meetings, talking with your team, to the earlier topic around not knowing all the answers, right? Okay, you have your sheet music, but are you okay? And are you comfortable playing some jazz? And just, it sounds kind of weird, but everyone's with you. Everyone's in there with you, And so I love that.
Another way to think about this is if you ever go to a sporting event, oftentimes in a major sporting event before, they'll sing the national anthem. And when you're singing the national anthem, if you mess up the words, everybody knows that you messed up the words because they know what the words are supposed to be, right? But when you're giving a speech or a presentation, sometimes we can get so deep in our head of, oh my gosh, I forgot what I was going to say, or I meant to say it like this, but I said it like that, or I got my points out of order, or I was telling the story, but I forgot part of it, It's nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. It's not like the audience has the script with them and they're following along. Hang on, you were supposed to say this and you said that.
That's right.
And busted. It just doesn't work like that, And so the audience takes their cues from you, meaning if you've ever seen a speaker and they seem like they're really uptight or uncomfortable, then all of a sudden the audience is oh, geez, this is painful to watch. Mm-hmm. But if the speaker is very, very comfortable in their own skin and they're very comfortable and confident on stage, then the audience is I immediately feel relaxed and at ease as well. And again, some of this just comes with reps. Some of this just comes with time of the more you do this, the more comfortable you start to feel.
Yeah. That's so true. And that's been my experience as well. For those of that are listening, that are speakers, that want to look at, well, how do I start making a living, whether it's full-time or part-time from this? One thing I know that comes up a lot and that you really helped me with in the speaker lab was this idea around not feeling worthy of charging higher fees and all of that. Will you walk us through that process a little bit, and what advice you would have there?
Yeah, whenever it comes to fees, one of the cool things about being a speaker is that you can make a ridiculous amount of money talking, which just feels like you're cheating or you're beating the game, or like it just feels weird, right? The very first time I got paid to speak is I went and I spoke for about 30, 45 minutes to like 300 teenagers, and they gave me a check for $1,000. And at that time in my life, I was like, this may as well have been $1 billion. I cannot believe you just gave me a check for $1,000 to run my mouth for a half an hour, whatever it was. And it just felt like, I can't believe this is happening. And since then, like times you get paid thousands and thousands of dollars, you're like, this is preposterous. This is completely ridiculous, right? But, one is that like, that's the speaking industry, right? That's what this world is. So it wasn't like I or whoever just arbitrarily coming up with random fees. Like that's what a lot of event planners and decision makers and events are accustomed to paying for speakers. So there's that side of it. And whenever it comes to you, one of the things that you have to remind yourself is that you are providing something of value and you need to receive something of value in exchange. Now, ideally, that comes in the form of some type of like currency or dollars, right? But also at the same time, like I think that there can be a negative stereotype or negative stigmatism about speaking for free. And like speaking for free is a bad thing. And I would argue that like speaking for free is okay if, big if here, you know why you're doing it. So like I said, if you're providing something of value, you need to receive something of value in exchange. And meaning like, let's say that you go speak at something and you have some type of book or product or service that you can offer, and they buy a bunch of books, or you have a bunch of people who sign up for your program or coaching or consulting or whatever it may be, that may be incredibly valuable to you, So in fact, just yesterday, I was talking to a guy who owns an apparel company, and he said, hey, sometimes I'll go speak for free and there will be clients in the audience that will buy thousands of units of apparel from me. And he was like, that seems worth it. I was like, yeah, that's worth way more than anything like they might write you a check for to come speak at that event, right? It could be worthwhile for you to speak at something that where the event planner or decision maker or the audience is well connected and they may want to invite you to come speak at something, right? So there's a lot of ways or reasons that you can receive value that go way beyond a check. But ultimately, I think one of the big mental shifts here is that whenever it comes to speaking is that you have to treat it like a business. You have to treat it like a business. And for whatever reason, whenever it comes to something like speaking, we think that because we are the product at the end of the day, we think that this is just fun for me. I enjoy doing this. I would do this if I was independently wealthy. I didn't need another dime. I would just do this for free for the rest of my life because I want to help people, want to make a difference, yada, yada, yada. That's all well and good. Nothing wrong with that. But at the end of the day, you're running a business and you have to treat it like this. And so there's no other, like you wouldn't go to a restaurant and the chef's like, you don't have to pay, or you could pay, what, I just like cooking stuff, So just whatever, just I'm going to pass around the tip jar, you just throw in whatever you feel like. They're going to be out of business really, really quickly, despite like how good the food may be or how big their heart is. Because again, you have to treat it as a business. And especially as you grow in your business, one of the hardest things to do is to say no to opportunities. There will start to be, over time, there will come opportunities where like they can't afford you. And I know maybe depending on where you are in your career, you may be like, that's ridiculous. No way that's going to happen. Yes, it will. Like if you stick with this, there will come times where you're just like, it just doesn't make sense for me to go and do that. Not because you're a bad person, not because they are a bad event planner or anything like that, but just realizing that you're providing something of value, and the better that you get at that thing and at providing the value, the more it increases what you are able and should be charging for that thing. Now, I would also say that I think there's a big misconception of people who go, well, whatever your fee is, you need to double or triple it because you're worth it. And you looked in the mirror and you said that you're important, and you are, like that's baloney. Okay. Cause there is like true like supply and demand with this. And there is like true like marketing and sales that you have to do. And in the same way of like someone who's getting emotionally, if you're trying to sell your house and you get emotionally attached to it, well, my house is worth millions. No, it's not. It's only worth what someone's willing to pay for it. And the same thing is true with being a speaker. You are providing a service. And so there's going to be a certain level of fees that you may be able to charge for that service. And some of that comes down to the event, and some of it comes down to you and your positioning of what it is that you do. But I do think that you're exactly right, Kendra, that there's just a big mental component, just the idea that you would get paid to speak, to do something that you think is fun and fulfilling and gratifying and rewarding, and it feels very self-serving. But if you're doing it in service of the audience and you're great at what it is that you do, yeah, you can make thousands and thousands of dollars doing this. We both know, you're a great example of this, as speakers who can charge tens of thousands of dollars and make hundreds of thousands of dollars from speaking, which again, to some people may sound completely preposterous and ridiculous, but that's the reality of the speaking industry.
Yeah. And to your earlier point, one thing I've always thought interesting is that, of course, we each want to aspire to be the best speaker we can. We take it at like a profession, and all the people you work with, you encourage that. But we probably both know people who are out there that are actually still making careers at this, that are decent or so-so, but not the great ones that we
Totally.
that we'd refer and recommend, yet they're still making a living at it. So I think part of this component, as you mentioned, is this idea that it's just, do you have the courage to do it?
Yeah.
And then that's why you get paid a higher premium. Is it's obviously some of it's skill based and referral based, but there is a component that I've seen play out in real time where it's like, no, it's just this person's the only one that has the courage to stand up and talk about this topic. And so we kind of had to settle to get this person, And so there's a courageous element to it as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to also compare yourself to other speakers and think like, well, why would someone pay me? I'm not as good as Tony Robbins or fill in the blank, whoever, and it's like, right. But also realize that 99.9% of organizations and groups don't have a budget to pay for Tony Robbins, right? They have a much, much smaller budget, but they're like, it doesn't mean that they're like, I have a smaller budget, therefore I'm willing to accept a crappy speaker. No, like they still want a good speaker. The other thing I think it's important to note is that every speaker that you look up to, you admire, you respect, that may have done hundreds or thousands of gigs or may get paid tens of thousands of dollars and are incredibly world-class at what it is that they do. There was a time where they had none gigs and then they did their first gig. And I promise you, they've sucked at it. They've had a lot of gigs that just didn't go well. So you may see them and think, oh, they're amazing. I could never do that, right? But you're trying to compare where someone is way down the path compared to where you are today. And like, that's just not fair. Like, that's not realistic whatsoever. It's like getting married and, you've been married for a week or something and you're talking to some couple who's been married for 50 years and you're like, oh, well, they know more than we do. Yeah, that's the way it works, but the longer you stick with it, the more the pendulum starts to swing that direction. And so the speakers that are excellent at what it is that they do, it's not like that they have some special talent or skill or ability that you don't. Oftentimes it's just, they've put the work in, they've treated it like a professional, not like an amateur, and they've just stuck with it over an extended period of time, and they didn't quit.
That's right. It's definitely the being persistent and having the courage to do it has been a huge component of it. So if you look at where you are today in your business, Grant, and then you look forward, what would you say you hope your legacy to be?
Yeah, I'd answer that in a couple different ways. Like one thing we talk about internally at the Speaker Lab, and I've talked about this externally as well, is like, I really believe that who you are is more important than what you do. Who you are is more important than what you do. Meaning, like, I love being an entrepreneur. I love being a business owner. I love the work that I do on a day in and day out basis. But my most important roles are being a good husband and being a good father. Like, those are the things that really ultimately matter to me. And so, like, for my wife and I, both of our parents are divorced, and we came from, broken families, and, growing up in that world, you're just like, well, this sucks, and we just didn't want to do that. We don't want to carry that forward. We want to say, no, like, I want to have a long, happy, successful marriage. That doesn't mean it's perfect by any means, but as a general rule, it feels like, yeah, there's a lot of things that we do right, and we get right. And the same thing with being a dad, like, my daughters did not get a vote on who their dad was, They came into the world and they're like, you're the guy, huh? All right, well, here we go. They're just stuck with me. And so I want to be the best possible dad to them. So when we talk about like legacy, like that's ultimately the stuff that matters. All the business crap, like whatever. But being a good husband, being a good father, like those are the things that ultimately matter. Now, on the business front, I part of the reason I started the Speaker Lab was through the lens of it's what I wish I had when I got started speaking. And I always felt like I had the potential, but I needed the plan. I had the potential, but I needed the plan. Meaning like, I knew I wasn't the world's greatest speaker. I knew I wasn't the world's worst speaker. I knew like I was good enough that I could potentially do this, but it's just like, but how does this work? Like we were talking about at the beginning, all those questions of how do you find gigs? What do you speak about? Who do I need to talk to? How do I get booked? What do I charge? How does this work? Can someone just explain this to me? And there's so many speakers that we've worked with and still so many speakers that are out there who are in the exact same shoes of just going like, I think I can do this. I just wish someone could show me how. Like literally the other day I was in an Uber and talking to the driver. He's doing this as a side hustle and I was like, what do you really want to be doing? He's like, well, I thought about this or thought about that. And he's like, you know what? I've always wanted to be a speaker. And like, you got the right guy.
You said you had no idea who you were picking up today, did you?
So we talked for a long time. And I just think, again, I think about like, he's where I was of going like, man, I would love to do this. I just don't know what to do. And I don't know how to do this. You were in the same spot, and so many others of like smart, capable, qualified people who are just going like, I just don't know what to do. And so whenever when one of our students, like one of the key measurements that we talk about internally is when a student books their first paid gig. When they book their first paid gig, whether it's $100 or $5,000 or whatever it may be, a couple things happen. One is, and I think the most important part of it is there's like this mental confidence, right? Excuse me. There's just this feeling of like, holy crap, I can do this, and it just feels like speaking felt like this mythical creature that I could never, achieve or accomplish. And oh my gosh, I just did it. And then there's also like the process side of it of if I can do this once, I can do this again and again and again and again. And so it creates kind of the snowball effect, and it's like pushing that first domino of the confidence that creates. And so when I think about speakers that we've worked with or that we've helped, and even like we were talking about at the very, very beginning, and you were kind to just share like, hey, wow, the Speaker Lab really impacted me, not in like a false humility way, but I'm like, no, like, thank you. But like you did the work, you're the one that has ultimately made this happen. And so whenever I talk with someone who's like, hey, I went through your stuff and I quit my job, or I just got paid the most money I've ever been paid from speaking, or we just moved into a dream house, or just took a dream vacation, or anything like that. Like that's incredibly gratifying and fulfilling to know that like, okay, I was a tiny little part of their life getting better. And so from a legacy standpoint, like that's really fulfilling. That's incredibly gratifying.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. I'm a big believer that how we show up and treat ourselves and our spouses and our children, if we have them, is everything. And I've often found that actually our relationship with our business is similar to how we treat ourselves and our family. And so the better you can be to yourself and your family, the better healthier your business will be, right? I think there's just really strong correlation there. So I love that you shared that and confirm that for me. I think a lot of people, especially entrepreneurs, get it because I think they kind of have to, because like they have to be quick and fail fast and figure it out. I think people who are part of these larger corporate ecosystems have a harder time with that, right? Because they're sort of at the demands of someone else and building someone else's dream. Let's face it, they're not necessarily always building their own dream.
Yeah. Yeah. I heard it described the other day that like an entrepreneur is someone who is like, you're chained to the steering wheel of the car, and whatever happens with the car, you're on the ride. You're stuck to it, and that's entrepreneurship. Like I said, there are days you're like, this is fun. All right, this is cool. And days like, man, it'd be nice to just have like a normal 9-to-5 gig, and I clock in and I clock out and I go home and I don't have to think about it, and it's not my problem, and I know what my paycheck's going to be every other Friday, and there's just a simplicity to that. But also there's the fun of just like, this is an adventure, and every week's a new challenge, and it's fun to continue to try to figure out how the pieces of the puzzle fit together.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Yeah. I mean, and that's, again, the essence of this podcast is trying to look through the lens of, look, doubt is going to be normal. It's going to show up. It's about how can you look at it as data? It's just as information about what to do next. What should you do next? And take the emotion out of it So I really appreciate you sharing that. How can people follow you and get in touch with you and sign up for the Speaker Lab and all the great things you offer, Grant?
Yeah, everything we do is over at thespeakerlab.com, thespeakerlab.com. If you listen to this podcast, you probably listen to other ones. And so you can check out the Speaker Lab podcast. It's been a minute, but I know you've been on the podcast. And so
Yes.
go back in the archives, go search for Kendra, you'll find it. And so, yeah, go check out the Speaker Lab podcast. But yeah, there's a lot of free resources over at thespeakerlab.com. So yeah, definitely check it out.
Yep. And I think I first found you on Facebook or something.
Okay, yeah.
So you have a Facebook community and then YouTube, and I think you're all over the place now.
We try, and there's certain we run a lot of paid ads, and so you may see an ad for us, and so yeah, we some stuff again we're good at, and other stuff are like we are mediocre at best at that channel or platform or whatever, and so again, like we talked about, every entrepreneur is doing their best.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think you're knocking it out of the park. I will tell you that I still probably. I worked with you in 2017, so we're going on 8 years here, if not more. And I probably still get at least maybe 8 to 10 emails a year.
Wow.
Or LinkedIn messages from people saying that they read your book and they saw my story in there, or that they heard the podcast with me on it and they wanted to know if I recommend the program.
That's cool. That's cool.
So you're doing better than you're giving yourself credit for.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like I said, hopefully the point of the podcast on a macro level and on a micro level on this particular episode is that like we're all just trying. And we're all stepping in and we're swinging and we're trying to take a rep. And again, some days it works, some days it doesn't, but we're staying in the game and putting one foot in front of the other. And so I'm no different than anyone else, just doing my best.
That's right. And I appreciate you sharing that so much because I think it gives everyone out there permission to feel the same and to recognize that, there's nothing wrong. I don't need to internalize this or make this, this molehill into a mountain. And let's just keep moving forward, because I believe what distinguishes the great leaders from the rest is that it's not that they don't feel doubt or imposter thoughts. They just keep doing what they need to do despite it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being with us here today, Grant. It's been such a pleasure to see you again.
It is completely my honor. Thanks for letting me hang out with you.
Likewise.
Thanks for tuning into the Unworthy Leader podcast, where we believe in leading with more honesty, heart, and humanity. If today's episode made you think, feel, or see things differently, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to become an official member of our community. Please consider sharing this with someone else who this may inspire or support. For more tools, resources, and conversations, head to the unworthyleaderpodcast.com. Until next week, stay true to yourself.